Hey y'all, Schematist here again to bother you, and this tutorial is going to be on how to build a JRPG battle theme. I know I made one of these in the past, but now I've got a little bit more experience, and even though I'm not a professional, I think I can do a little justice and give you guys a kickstart if you're really first starting off and you want to get, more experience making these kind of genres of music, then this might be for you. But if you are a professional or you have more skill, then please don't be afraid to chip in. We can get a good conversation going. But I'm going to jump right into this tutorial. In fact, I don't want to waste time, so let me just explain the overview. I'm going to play the full thing, and then I'm going to come back and break it down. This was super inspired by the Etrian Odyssey composer Yuzo Koshiro. He's quickly becoming one of my favorites, and because of that, I wanted to make something similar to his style, of course using a little bit of my influence as well, and my personal opinions and judgments. But, without boring you guys any further, here's the project. Alright, so for the guys who are still with me, I'm going to get incredibly blunt. Okay? So, if you're making these JRPG battle themes, the main thing you want to focus on is the initial 30 to 45 seconds. Why do I say this? Because when you get to the end, toward the breakdown, this is the least of your worries. This is the easiest part of the song. Because instead of worrying about building and adding hype, you're just subtracting, you're deleting, you're minimizing. Everything is just you're just stripping it down to the core. And this is when the song gets in a more relaxed state. It puts the player in a more relaxed state, and so you don't have to worry about exaggerating it as much. Now, this is important because right after the breakdown, it comes right back into the loop, which I'm going to come all the way back over here, which is the intro again, and this brings all the adrenaline back to the player, as if there was no relaxed state, as if there was no peaceful time, and that's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a seamless loop, a seamless transition that signals you're still in danger to some extent, right? And that makes for good gameplay. You don't want to turn on a game and you have weak battle music. It's just not good. It creates a stale feeling. It's unimaginative. It doesn't speak to your imagination. It's not believable. So the way I did it, and hopefully this helps for you, I focused on two main instruments to bring in this immediate attraction, and it was the bass and the guitar. Two simple, really easy to obtain instruments. My bass guitar came from Shredded X, which is here. It works in Contact. It came from Impact Soundworks. I would highly recommend checking this library out. It's very strong, very powerful stuff. I EQ'd it slightly, not too much. I just rolled a little bit of the low end off, but I really wanted it to be a little bit bassy, just not too much. So I didn't want it to create any mud on your headphones or anything like that. So, and then the guitar also I got from Shredded Jex, I mean from Impact Soundworks, and the guitar pattern is called Shredded Jex. Where did I put that? It's right here, actually. It's amazing. I honestly think this is probably one of the best guitar samples. I'm not great at mixing them yet, but I did throw quite a bit on there. I think the most important is the reverb you want to throw on there. And if you have guitar rig 4 or 5 or 3, that works perfectly fine, you know? Um, and I use those two. As a matter of fact, I'm going to highlight this section so you can hear this, how it sounds on its own, as a matter of fact. So you can hear just these two, and I'm going to mute everything else because I really want you to hear how this brings in the player. And I'm going to keep the drums going because the drums are going at a really simple rhythmic pace that just says, okay, this is the tempo of the song, but these two instruments immediately shoot the attention to the intro, bringing in this adrenaline. And here it is now. Now those two instruments gave us an immediate pull. Now what you really need to do now is, I focused this on my other tutorial before, but I'm going to mention it again. You're going to want something that rises the song to its boiling point where it's ready to crash back down. And then to do that, I use a flurry of strings. It looks kind of complicated, but it's not. They're all in the same key, and I just made one pattern and then copy and pasted it right below it. And play with the velocity a little bit. This is important because you don't want it to be too loud and you don't want it to be too low. You want it to be heard because this is what's really giving the final push to starting the actual melody. So I used that string to get that going. These strings came from Adderall Orchestral. In fact, the rest of these samples actually came from Adderall Orchestral. I don't think anything came from anything else, except for the bells and the choirs. They came from Nexus. But here we go. Now, with these strings and this bell here, and this bell pattern, it crashes in to the main intro, which is here. This is where I spent most of my time. I think this probably was the highlight. Not necessarily because it was super complicated, it's just you have to have the energy in there. You can't have the player feeling bored at this particular moment as it sets the pacing for the rest of the song. I kept the bass energetic, very fast paced, and I varied up the guitar pattern a little bit, but all in all, it's gonna have the same feel. This build up here was to set the tempo for this intro, for this main melody, and nothing really changed. The bass is going and the guitar is going. The addition that makes it come to life is the brass, the full strings here, and I would have to say the spiccato does a good job of holding its own. It's not clashing with anything. It kind of holds the beat. And then the trumpet is actually the same exact pattern as the brass up here. In fact, the only reason I did that, by layering them up, they both have slightly different sounds. I would say this brass is a little bit more mid-range to low-range, and the trumpets are a little bit more high-range. So I panned the brass a little bit left and then the trumpets to the right. So it kind of has like a little bit of a stereo effect. It also adds a little bit more teeth to the mix. So I'm going to play this section again. So if you want to hear how that sounds all together, it's going to sound like this. And then that's about it for that section. It's not too much of I would say you don't have to kill yourself. Now that you have the bass line going, you want to keep it in the same key, of course. And of course you want to keep the guitar in the same key that you started with in the build-up. The main thing with the build-up is you want to have elements that are going to really brighten up the song. And I really love that trumpet, brass kind of feeling for JRPG. It kind of has this feeling of happiness, but intensity at the same time. And you also don't want to have your instruments clashing with each other. So always make sure to pan. And then we come over to the main melody. But before we get there, you have to make sure of one thing. I would say this is a really, really big thing, but no one really pays much attention to this. You don't want to have your instruments battling for attention, and I almost skipped over this, but as you see here, let me zoom in a little bit. You know, I gave I gave the listener a break two times. When the brass is going here, I didn't make the brass come up in the next measure. And I took it out completely and let the spiccato strings do the work and the bells do the work. It's really subtle and no one thinks of it as important, but it is. It kind of creates a little bit of realism. Like, let's say if people were actually playing your instruments, they would need time to catch their breath anyway. So having them subtracted here is a big difference. And then they come in the next measure, the brass here and then the trumpet here again at the bottom, you see? And when they're playing, the spiccato and the bells are chilling out. They're not there, they're waiting for their turn. Don't have your instruments battling each other. Okay, now for the next section. Alright, so now we're getting ready to about wrap this up, because now that we're at the main melody, well, considering that we've done the intro and the build-up, we already found our comfort zone. Your main melody is not going to stray far from that. In fact, it's going to be basically the same thing, which is why you can look and see that the intro and the main melody section look fairly similar. It's not too crazy. As well, we're still using our anchor instruments, the bass and the guitar. I varied up the melody of both to create a little bit more variation. The variation is wonderful. It creates a nice freshness. It's not stale. It's not dry. It's not repetitive. Then you won't get bored of it as a listener. It's going to be something new, and you want that. It creates more of a, just a more of a new exciting experience that's gonna say, oh, okay, this is a new story that your song is telling, and that's perfectly fine, and it's highly recommended actually. But what you're really gonna do with the main melody is not only focus on creating a new harmony, a new melody for the player to hum, but you're gonna want to add something that completely separates it from the intro and the build-up. And it's subtle here, but what I did to make that little differentiation was the addition of the choirs and the harps here. The brass and trumpet remain the same. I mean, I altered the melody a little bit, but they're in the same places. They're not too far off from each other. They're basically in the same compositional makeup here, as you can see. They're very spaced out evenly. The harp was new, and the choirs add this great deal of atmosphere that's subtle but effective. And also I added a little bit of a arpeggiator here, also very subtle, but it adds a nice fantasy aspect to it. And then everything else is basically on autopilot, because now the drums, we don't even have to go over that. It's a basic rock, kind of regular rock pattern of kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. That's nothing that takes any more explaining. Anyone can really do that with basic programming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this section really quick and I'll let it play. And then we're going to see how it sounds and notice how the bass number 3 leads directly into bass 5, which is for the breakdown. The bass is really the driving point. It makes the song move in whatever direction you want. So really pay attention to that and make sure that it syncs perfectly with the next movement. And this is going to sound like this. Alright, so now we get to the breakdown. Now this is the part that I think you can honestly do this with your eyes closed. This is the easiest part. It's my least favorite, but honestly we always need to have a breakdown when we make RPG music because it's proper protocol, We've got to have one in there. The whole point of it is to just lighten up the load a little bit. Instead of adding, we're going to be subtracting a lot. So we're going to start shaving a lot of things down, and the elements that we do have, we're going to start making them a little bit brighter and steady, kind of like a heartbeat. As I mentioned in my previous tutorial video, the spiccato strings here and the choirs, they don't change. I made one pattern for the breakdown section, and it worked throughout. The spiccato is at a very steady pace, like I said, similar to a heartbeat, and the same goes for the choirs. The only thing I would say is the big driving thing for any breakdown is the the pacing of your drums. You're gonna want a really, really slow, steady, chill out pacing. You don't want anything that's gonna really speed up someone's heart rate because that point is over. That's what the initial 30, 45 seconds were for. Another thing, um, your bass line, it's going to be a little bit lighthearted. I think I went up about an octave or so, or not, maybe not a full octave, but I started hitting the notes a little bit above my starting bass was with an E. I went to a C, a higher C instead, and kind of played around in that area. It's not a huge difference, but it really makes it a little less aggressive. And the same thing goes for the guitar pattern here. I instead of messing around with the lower octave, I went up an octave and kept it really lighthearted, really playful melody, really inspiring, uplifting, and that ties right back into the loop, which is the very beginning of the song. I have it here fading out. But it's really simple. I would say focus mainly on the pacing. Everything it just feels like a steady pulse, a steady heartbeat. Nothing is too driving, and that's what a breakdown really is. I think this part is actually very boring, but some people might like it. I really rather do the initial part, but we've got to have every piece to make it a fully perfect song. And let me highlight that and play the section here, and then we can probably call it a day. And there we are. That's basically a battle theme in a nutshell. Hopefully I didn't put anybody to sleep. I really love doing these. Again, I'm not a professional. I just really like doing them. Hopefully I can break out eventually one of these days when grad school's not killing me. But yeah, these are always fun. If you have any more questions, send me a message. I always reply. I don't have any problems with that. And cheers, guys. Have a good one.